Good morning, and welcome to this Conservation Applied Research and Development, or CARD webinar, which is going to report on how small commercial HVAC contractors make decisions. Thanks so much for joining us today. I'd like to cover a few housekeeping items before we start. First, all attendees will be in listen-only mode. Also, we'll answer all questions at the end of the presentation, but as questions occur to you, please type them into the Q&A box and send them to all panelists. The Q&A box can be opened by clicking the ellipse in the lower right corner of your screen, as indicated on this slide. We'll do our best to answer all questions within the time allocated, but if for some reason we don't get to some, we will answer them after the webinar. This webinar is being recorded and will be available on the department's website in a few weeks. The slide set from the webinar will also be available on our website, but if you need it sooner, just email me directly and I'll send it to you. Finally, if you would like closed captions on the webinar, please click the CC bubble in the lower left-hand corner of your screen. I'm Mary Sue Lobenstein, and I'm the Research Planning Director at the Minnesota Department of Commerce, Division of Energy Resources. In that role, I identify and analyze gaps within utility conservation improvement programs and coordinate and plan research to fill those gaps. The CARD program is a major tool of that work. With me today is Laura Silver. Laura is a Principal State Program Administrator at the Department of Commerce, where she reviews Utility Conservation Improvement Program triennial plans and annual status reports. Laura is the Project Manager of the research that is the subject of today's webinar, and she will be moderating the Q&A portion of the program. Our presenters today are Jake Fuller from Ecometric, John Van Klock from Apex Analytics, and John Blofus from the Center for Energy and Environment. Jake is a managing consultant at Ecometric, where he manages projects and performs quantitative analysis for residential, commercial, and industrial sector energy efficiency programs. Jake was the project manager on this research. A senior associate at Apex Analytics, Joe brings a broad base of DSM program knowledge from more than 12 years of program evaluation and market research experience. In addition to qualitative data collection and analysis, Joe conducts best practices and benchmarking studies. He also manages projects involving multiple data collection approaches and synthesizes findings from multiple data sources. Joe led the focus group effort of this project. Finally, John is a senior program manager at CEE. In that role, he works across CEE's commercial programs to increase savings achievements and is responsible for various operational and program development and marketing aspects of those programs, including managing the Xcel Energy commercial refrigeration and one-stop HVAC programs. For this project, John was the literature review lead. Welcome to all of you. We look forward to the presentation. Just to provide a little context, this webinar is one in an ongoing series that's designed to summarize the results from research projects that were funded by Minnesota's Applied Research and Development Fund, which was established in the Next Generation Energy Act of 2007. The purpose of this fund is to help Minnesota utilities achieve their energy savings goals. About $2.6 million is set aside annually for the CARD program, which awards research grants in a competitive request for proposal process. As you can see by the pie chart, CARD projects funded to date have been in all building sectors, as well as some that cross multiple sectors. The subject of today's webinar is, of course, the commercial sector, and we'll discuss key findings on small commercial HVAC decision-making in Minnesota. Now I'll turn it over to Jake for today's presentation.
Thank you, Mary Sue, and thank you all for joining us today. For today's agenda, we will cover our research objectives, the methodologies we used, our key findings, our recommendations, and finally, we'll answer any questions that you may have. This project focused on two main research objectives, which will be discussed in more detail on the following slides. The first objective was to understand the motivations, information sources, and decision-making processes of workers involved in commercial HVAC installations. The second objective was to understand the business side of HVAC installation and design companies. This research was conducted to gather in-depth data on the motivations and barriers that drive decisions of individual HVAC installers working in residential and smaller commercial buildings. The resulting information should ensure program interventions are meaningful to decision makers and responsive to market conditions. To understand the motivations, information sources, and decision-making processes of workers involved in HVAC installations, we developed questions to gather the perspectives of contractors, distributors, and system designers. For questions involving motivations, we wanted to know what motivates installers, architects, and engineers. What are installers' favorite installations to do and why? What are architect and engineers' favorite systems to design and why? What brings them to work every day? And what are their pain points? For questions involving information sources, we wanted to know, where do they get their information? Are employees required to get continuing education credits? And if so, where do they find these opportunities? For questions involving decision-making processes, we wanted to know, what is the path to purchase and installation? How are employees in different roles involved in this path to purchase? Do they select projects they work on? If so, how do they select them? Who makes decisions about what throughout the entire path to purchase and installation? Are there any differences in the approach for the decision-making processes based on building type, or project type, such as new construction versus retrofit, medium versus small buildings, and other things like that? When would an HVAC installation be likely to be above code and why? And what are the up and downsides of working above code by individual and by their role? To understand the business side of HVAC installation and design companies, we develop questions in two categories: their business model and overall staffing. For questions involving the business model, we wanted to know, what does a typical day look like for them? What types of products sell and why? What influences in the marketplace inform the decisions, such as what are their competitors doing? Why do they sell particular products or brands? What is the history of their manufacturer relationships? Do they partner with other firms for some jobs? If so, what do these partners contribute? Why those particular partners? How do firms structure a project so that they make money? And what are the essential rules they must follow to be profitable? For questions involving staffing and talent pipeline, we wanted to know, to what extent are companies experiencing a shortage of skilled workers? What are drivers of any such shortage? What are companies doing in response to this shortage? Do companies prefer to hire skilled workers or unskilled workers and train them in-house? Now, I will hand it over to my colleague, John, who will provide some details on our study methodology.
Thanks, Jake. Now, like Jake said, I'm going to present a brief overview of our research methodology, which we divided into two main categories. The first category was a review of existing literature, such as market assessment reports by research organizations from across the country, previous card-funded studies, and finally, industry websites that HVAC professionals are known to frequent. The second category was primary data collection. The main activity in this category was collecting information directly from HVAC market actors, such as HVAC installers, distributors, architects, and engineers. The means by which we gathered this information included focus groups, one-on-one interviews, and contractor ride-alongs. I'll go into our methodology in more detail on the following slides. As I mentioned, we began the study by completing a comprehensive literature review to determine the current state of knowledge around HVAC contractor decision-making. Although we reviewed many reports, we found some of the most informative to be the HVAC Market Actor Profile Report published by NIA in 2020 and the 2017 CARD study published by Seventh Wave, now Slipstream, and CEE that provided extensive information about the Minnesota rooftop unit market. The 2017 CARD report estimated that over 80% of commercial buildings in Minnesota, approximately 20,700, have rooftop units serving their HVAC requirements. We also reviewed several high-profile industry websites, including ACHR News, HVAC and Refrigeration Insider, and HVAC Business. Our literature review indicated that many HVAC industry professionals look to these websites for information and to keep up to date on industry trends. Our website reviews consisted of analyzing both the content of posts and articles, as well as the frequency a given topic was mentioned. Finally, we made the decision to include primary data collection activities early on in the study to supplement the secondary data collection that made up the majority of our literature review. The primary data collection consisted of one-on-one interviews with 5 utility HVAC program managers from both within and outside of Minnesota. One of the main benefits of conducting one-on-one interviews with utility program managers early on in the study was that they helped inform our subsequent data collection activities with HVAC contractors and other market actors. One of the goals of the study was to understand the differences between the northern and southern climate zones, so we broke the market actor sample up into 3 geographical areas. These areas were the northern climate zone, southern climate zone, and greater Twin Cities. To generate the list of market actors to sample from, we leveraged an online industry database from Mergent Intellect to gather lists of HVAC firms in Minnesota using NAICS and SIC codes. We ended up with 4,140 firms, half of which were in the greater Twin Cities area. The remainder were in areas outside of the Twin Cities area in either southern or northern Minnesota. As part of our primary data collection, our team conducted 3 online focus groups with contractors involved in the installation and sales of small to medium-sized commercial HVAC equipment. The table on this slide shows how we segmented the focus groups by company size and geographic location. In total, 9 HVAC contractors participated in the focus groups, which took place in 2021 on September 28th and 29th and October 4th. Each focus group lasted 90 minutes. Initially, we had planned to conduct separate focus groups with companies working in northern Minnesota and southern Minnesota. However, we were unable to recruit any companies working primarily in northern Minnesota. Therefore, the focus group that included companies outside of the Twin Cities consisted of 2 companies working primarily in southern Minnesota. In addition to focus groups, the team conducted in-depth telephone interviews with 9 HVAC contractors that provide installation services for small to medium-sized commercial HVAC equipment. The team also conducted 1 interview with an HVAC distributor that supplies the small to medium-sized HVAC sector in Minnesota. These interviews were all conducted between September and October of 2021 and generally lasted between 30 and 45 minutes. As you can see on the slide, the team segmented the contractor interviews by company size and geographic location. Before conducting the interviews, we screened interview respondents to ensure they had sufficient experience with small to medium-sized commercial HVAC installations, as well as sufficient exposure to project decision-making. The team also screened respondents to ensure that HVAC installation, as opposed to maintenance and repair, made up a significant share of the respondents' business. The original target of completed interviews was 30 for contractors and 10 for distributors. To help with recruitment, the team scheduled outreach around the shoulder season, which for the HVAC industry is during the spring and fall when HVAC contractors are usually less busy than during the summer and winter. However, our team and the recruiting contractor that we employed found that despite the monetary incentive to participate, many contractors and distributors were either too busy or uninterested in participating in the interviews. Therefore, we expanded our efforts to reach other market actors in the HVAC industry for a more comprehensive view of the decision-making process behind HVAC projects. These additional market actors included 4 architecture and engineering firms that provide HVAC design services in Minnesota. The team conducted these interviews, generally lasting 45 minutes to an hour, in March and April of 2022. For these interviews, we only included companies that had significant experience with small to medium-sized commercial HVAC projects in the state of Minnesota. Most of the firms had experience in several states, but we asked respondents to focus on their experiences here in Minnesota. The final piece of our primary data collection activities was to conduct a ride-along with an HVAC contractor providing small to medium-sized commercial HVAC installation services in the Twin Cities area. In recruitment for potential ride-along participants, we use screening criteria similar to those for the focus groups and interviews. In the one-on-one interviews that I previously described, the team asked respondents if they were interested in participating in a ride-along for an additional monetary incentive. The ride-along consisted of a member of our project following an HVAC contractor to the site of a small to medium-sized commercial HVAC project. The team's goal for the ride-along was to observe the interactions between the contractor and their commercial client, including system design and installation discussions. Due to contractors' busy schedules and COVID-19 restrictions at the time, The team had difficulty finding contractors interested in participating in the ride-along portion of the study, and therefore we were only able to secure one ride-along to complement the focus groups and one-on-one interviews that we previously performed. Now that I've given you the background on our study's methodology, I'm going to turn it over to Joe to discuss our key findings.
Thanks, John. So jumping into our findings, the main focus of this study was HVAC market actors and their significant role in determining the type and efficiency of the RTUs they design and install for their customers. Therefore, it's important to understand what drives those contractors and where they get their HVAC information from. Our key findings are as follows. Most architectural and engineering firms interviewed reported that the majority of projects they work on are in large commercial buildings. However, small to medium commercial buildings make up at least 25% of the buildings each firm works on. Architects and engineers described two key sources of satisfaction in their work: designing systems to achieve sustainability and decarbonization goals, and solving problems for customers. The two primary motivations that contractors described, and related pain points, focused on achieving customer satisfaction and solving technical problems. Further emphasizing this point, contractors see building and maintaining relationships with end-use customers and general contractors as central to their business development approach. We'll talk more about that later. Now getting into the HVAC contractors' information sources. HVAC suppliers, including distributors, manufacturers, reps, and manufacturers, are a primary source of information for HVAC contractors, although contractors turn to different supplier sources for different types of information. When HVAC contractors needed to learn about the equipment they recommend, they primarily turn to their vendors. Contractors reported relying on manufacturers to a greater degree for technical information related to specific installations as the complexity of equipment has increased. Contractors also describe the internet as a significant source of information for technical information, referencing sites including HVAC-related message boards like hvactalk.com, social media such as Facebook groups for those in the industry, and online manufacturer product manuals. All four of the architecture and engineering respondents looked to ASHRAE and distributor manufacturer seminars for information and training on the HVAC market. Specifically, the architecture and engineer respondents were interested in learning about new HVAC technologies, solutions, and market trends. And in addition to understanding HVAC market actors' motivations and information sources in general, it's also important to understand how their decision-making can be dictated by the context in which a specific project occurs. So this study assesses HVAC market actor decision-making in the context of three main HVAC project types. Design-build projects, in which the contractor proposes a system design as part of their bid. In this case, the installer also specifies the equipment. Equipment replacement projects, in which the contractor is replacing a piece of equipment that is part of an existing HVAC system. In these cases, the contractor typically specifies the equipment, but they may be constrained by the infrastructure that's already there. And we'll get into more detail in that in a few minutes. And plan and specify projects in which the contractor bids to install an HVAC system that someone else, typically an architect or engineer, has already designed. We most often discuss these projects in the context of new construction, but it's also possible for equipment replacement projects to be plan and specify. And we're going to briefly talk through the important drivers of HVAC decision-making under each project type. Diving into design-build, among the three installation types, design-build projects give contractors the greatest freedom to design the HVAC system and specify equipment. So key design considerations include the physical characteristics of the space, how big it is, how open it is, how many windows there are, what the orientation is, and how the space will be used, including whether there are any special heating and cooling needs like server rooms that have to be kept cool, or production processes that are going to generate heat. Finally, contractors consider their customers' likely budgets and willingness to pay for higher-end systems. They don't want to propose a system that's far outside the customer's price range. Contractors noted that rental property owners in particular can be reluctant to invest in higher-end systems, as can commercial tenants in rented space who are uncertain how long they'll remain in that location. And along with that freedom to design systems, contractors need the broadest capabilities to complete design-build projects, including system design, planning, and project management skills. So experienced HVAC company staff, often the owner of small companies, typically lead the process of designing the HVAC system in design-build projects. And the HVAC contractors also reported relying heavily on manufacturers and distributors for support in designing systems in design-build projects, including recommendations on specific equipment for a given application. These manufacturers and distributors might have staff with expertise and access to design software that the HVAC contractors don't have in-house. And relying on manufacturers and distributors for this support allows the contractors to avoid investing the resources needed to bring these capabilities in-house, which they may only rarely need. And so given the broad capabilities needed for design-build projects, some contractors, particularly smaller ones, will avoid design-build projects. They see it as easier and less risky to complete plan and specify installations in which someone else is responsible for system design, or equipment replacement projects in which they can base the equipment specification decisions on the performance of an existing piece of equipment. So next, looking at equipment replacement, HVAC contractors are typically responsible for specifying the equipment installed in equipment replacement scenarios, but they're limited by the existing infrastructure like ducting and roof curbs. A larger change in system design that isn't compatible with that existing infrastructure is often cost prohibitive relative to a like-for-like replacement of the existing equipment with a new model of the same type of equipment. As a result, HVAC contractors rarely suggest changes to equipment type or system design in equipment replacement projects. Some possible exceptions include when there have been changes to the use of space. For example, as computer technology has changed, server rooms have gotten smaller and need less cooling. If the existing equipment is obsolete and is no longer cost effective to replace. And despite these limitations, contractors reported that in some ways, equipment replacement projects can be more favorable to efficiency improvements than new construction. In a new construction scenario, the HVAC system competes for a limited budget with multiple other systems and features. And often contractors noted that building developers will look to cut costs on the HVAC system rather than aspects of the building that are going to be more visible to the occupants. Equipment replacement projects are also often standalone improvements, and they don't face that same type of cost competition. And so customers completing equipment replacement projects are also often the owners of the building and plan to hold on to the building for several years, in contrast to developers interested in quickly selling a building. And so as a result, those owners are more likely to invest in long-term benefits of an existing system. Finally, looking at plan and specify projects, HVAC contractors have the least system design input in plan and specify projects, in which their role is to install a system designed by a third party, typically an engineer contracted to the general contractor or building developer. Contractors might offer equipment alternatives or suggest opportunities to modify the design to reduce either upfront costs or long-term operational costs as a way to differentiate their bid from their competitors. And once they've won the project, contractors might suggest modifications to the design that they think will work better. They also might be asked to suggest value engineering options to cut costs. And contractors' relationships with the client are important in plan and specify work. Most interviewed contractors avoid open solicitations. Instead, they bid on projects when they're part of a limited group, and they receive those opportunities to bid on those projects through their relationships with general contractors. In addition to the different project types, we wanted to understand how HVAC market actors think about efficient systems. And HVAC contractors indicated that efficient systems were generally no more difficult to install than standard systems, but commissioning and completing the rebate applications could increase the time required for efficient installations. Architecture and engineering firms also indicated that efficient systems were generally no more difficult to design than standard systems. It's just a matter of selecting the correct equipment. HVAC contractors reported that a small but growing group of customers were familiar with heat pumps, and the contractors stated that customer interest in heat pumps comes primarily from environmental or carbon motivations. And architecture and engineering firms frequently worked with conservation programs that provide technical support and incentives to encourage energy-efficient building designs, including the HVAC systems. All 4 architecture and engineering respondents reported that these programs were helpful in their efforts to include more efficient HVAC systems in small to medium commercial buildings. And HVAC contractors and engineers described 2 key factors that increase the likelihood a project will include efficient equipment: owner-occupied facilities and publicly owned or subsidized buildings. And getting into the contractor business considerations, these are important to understand since they can impact the way contractors approach their work. So interview findings suggest that most contractors do not see competing to offer the lowest price as a sustainable long-term strategy. Instead, they build their businesses on the strength of their relationships and professional reputations with clients who can bring them repeat business and referrals, and partners like general contractors who can award them installation work and are more likely to accept their input on system design and equipment specification. At the same time, on a project level, one of the greatest threats to profitability for contractors is the potential for callbacks to address something that's not working properly. So the long-term need to maintain customer satisfaction in order to get the next referral or opportunity to bid, combined with the short-term need to avoid callbacks, means that contractors will want to focus on projects that they're confident they can complete well. And contractors might pick and choose what projects to take on, and they may limit the services they offer based on their in-house technical knowledge. They may need to see sufficient long-term demand for a product or service before making the investment in staff or training to deliver that product or service. In terms of adding skill sets or just increasing capacity, HVAC contractors most often reported it was difficult to find skilled workers. 2 contractors reported that unskilled labor was available, but most of the contractors suggested they prefer to hire skilled staff that would be able to take on projects independently. There was one that noted, however, that they prefer to hire and train unskilled staff in order to avoid any bad habits that staff may have developed at previous companies. And now I'll hand it over to Jake to talk through the recommendations for efficiency programs that we drew out of all of this.
Thank you, Joe. Based on what we heard from HVAC market actors and conservation program managers in Minnesota, our team developed a few recommendations to improve conservation program design and outreach to better serve the HVAC market and create lasting savings. These include developing case studies showcasing the energy and non-energy benefits to customers of efficient technologies. These case studies should emphasize the potential to increase customer satisfaction and solve problems that standard efficiency RTUs may not be equipped to solve. Another one is to promote workforce training with a focus on high efficiency HVAC equipment. Contractors know the benefits of well-trained employees, which could motivate them to encourage their employees to participate in this training. HVAC contractors typically rely on distributors and manufacturers for information and training on high efficiency HVAC units. So look for these existing relationships to leverage when designing midstream and upstream programs. Also, work to strengthen relationships with distributors. Articulate the value proposition to distributors of marketing high efficiency RTUs and how it will improve their business outcomes. Help distributors drive sales of high efficiency RTUs with the following methods. Help distributors provide technical training to help contractors become more comfortable with these high efficiency RTUs. Sales training for distributor staff to encourage them to proactively talk to HVAC contractors about high efficiency RTUs and how they can be profitable for them to install. Consider developing a group of qualified or approved contractors that have been trained on the installation of these high efficiency units and can help drive customer confidence in installing these units. Also, move rebates for high efficiency RTUs upstream. Providing midstream rebates at the distributor level has several advantages over providing downstream rebates. These include working with fewer market actors than downstream rebates while still having close contact with HVAC contractors through the distributors. This approach also takes the administrative burden off HVAC contractors and their end users, which is a common barrier to program participation. To compensate distributors for their increased administrative burden, consider providing them with a monetary incentive. Continuing with a few more recommendations, recognize that there may be limitations to the midstream approach, especially with the plan and specified type projects. With these projects, mechanical engineering or architectural firms specify what equipment the contractor will install. There's usually very little chance for contractors or distributors will recommend changing the specifications in any way. Therefore, it's important to also reach mechanical engineering and architectural firms early and often with messaging to promote their specification of high efficiency rooftop units. Incentivize early replacement of rooftop units. Program managers interviewed by the econometric team reported that 80 to 90% of existing RTUs are replaced on failure. As described above, this scenario most often results in a code minimum efficiency RTU being installed as a replacement. Offering a higher incentive for customers who replace a working RTU may entice customers to consider replacing their RTU with a high efficiency unit and would allow for the additional time often required for the delivery and installation of those units. Minnesota program managers reported that the savings they see from RTUs in their programs were relatively low. The reason cited is that baseline cooling efficiency for RTUs has risen over the years. Depending on the application, high efficiency RTUs typically don't result in large cooling savings in Minnesota's climate. With the passage of the Energy Conservation and Optimization Act of 2021, Minnesota utilities will have more opportunities to achieve greater savings from RTUs through the deployment of technologies such as heat pump RTUs, as well as cross-selling RTUs with demand response programs, which were cited by several utility program managers as potential opportunities. Commercial efficiency programs should pursue contractor-focused market intervention strategies for technologies likely to be installed in smaller, owner-occupied commercial buildings. Doctors and dentist offices and some restaurants and retail spaces often meet the conditions that provide contractors the greatest opportunity to promote efficiency. Strategies that engage design teams and market actors further upstream, like distributors and manufacturers representatives, may be more effective than contractor outreach in influencing HVAC installations in other types of facilities. And finally, commercial efficiency programs should include financial support for HVAC tune-ups and other pathways for contractors to increase their touch points with customers and provide opportunities to promote efficient equipment.
Great. Thanks for that great presentation, you three. If you have not already done so, please type any additional questions you have into the Q&A panel and send them to us. Laura, do you have questions for the panelists at this point?
Yes, we do. All right. This person wonders whether research gleaned information about what precipitates change in the product mix, or what drives change. Is it primarily consumer driven or manufacturer driven? Trying to glean here what would facilitate a shift to heat pumps in Minnesota.
I think that's a great question. What we saw in the interviews with contractors and what Joe summarizes, their things they're most concerned about is customer satisfaction and reducing callbacks. They really rely on leveraging long-term relationships with their customers and word of mouth to grow their business. So it really comes down to keeping the customer happy. And I think what's important for contractors to sell new technologies is for them to be confident that they can keep their customers happy with their installations and the systems they design. So I think it is important for distributors and manufacturers to be involved providing training and information to the contractors so that they are confident in selling heat pumps and kind of new technologies. But ultimately it does come down to the customer, their budget, and the physical characteristics or needs of their buildings as well. Is there anything you want to add there, Joe?
Yeah, I think I think it is kind of a both. You need both supply side and demand side efforts there, and kind of in some ways a chicken and egg problem. One thing we heard is definitely there is growing demand from customers for heat pumps, and that's really driven by, like I mentioned, environmental considerations, things like going for LEED in a building, those types of certifications for new construction, sustainability goals, that kind of thing as well. And yeah, and like Jake said, just really there's such a kind of pressure on contractors to really be confident in what they install. So kind of having that contractor education and contractor knowledge is important.
All right. How do commercial efficiency programs know which markets are contractor focused? If we don't have access to which properties are renter versus owner occupied. I think
I think you just kind of that's a good question because you don't know going into it which properties are renter versus owner occupied. But I think you just have to look at the types of buildings that are more likely to be owner occupied, like dentist offices, restaurants, non-chain restaurants, that types of thing. I think you just have to kind of look at the types of buildings and that market segment that's more likely to be owner occupied and um, focus your efforts on that segment.
Where did you obtain the 4,140 contractor list? And is this published, available to the public? How do you access this data?
Sure. So we got our data on the contractors from Mergent Intellect, which is it's a directory database. I believe there's over 100 million private businesses on there where you can get information. It also provides census data by zip code, um, information on building addresses. We had to do a lot of screening to make sure we were looking at small to medium firms that work in the small to medium commercial space. I don't know, Joe, is this a public database? I believe you can access it through libraries.
Yeah, it's not necessarily a public database, but it is available through some libraries. I can access it through my public library here in Portland, Oregon.
Yeah, I do know it's also on New York Public Library, but I'm not sure about access to that.
You mentioned case studies as a way to inform the market. How would that work in practice? Does the case study info get integrated into training or distributed by email to contractors? What are
Yeah, I
your
can take that
thoughts?
one. I think that's a good question. So, for some of the programs that I work on, we use case studies as part of our marketing and educational pieces. I think, generally speaking, what we're encouraging our customers to do, we know works technically, and oftentimes we know that there are other people that have already done this. But a lot of times customers don't feel that way. If they're unfamiliar with the technology or their contractor hasn't been doing a lot of these types of installs, having a case study to show both the customer and contractor, this person, not too far from you did exactly what we're encouraging you to do, and it worked out well for them. I mean, it seems pretty simple, but I think that's one of the big benefits of these kind of case studies. And then, of course, if you do have any sort of training program, identifying a site where an install has happened, where not only could they read about it in a case study, but also potentially reach out to that person and ask questions, can also be really valuable.
Okay, I'm gonna combine two questions here. So the first question was, it sounds like another barrier is getting information to all the different players. Which players in the state might be best to reach out to the manufacturer website, Facebook pages, etc.? And then somebody else asked, there was no distinction between service techs and service salespeople. Which group is driving the effort to sell efficiency upgrades, early replacements? Are the limitation of staffing tech are the limitation of staffing techs or sales professionals? Okay, well, I hope it's all right I combine those. They both seem to be talking about more distinctions about the different roles of people in the chain of events.
Yeah, I can start with the second part there about the distinction between service techs and salespeople, and kind of who's driving the effort to sell upgrades. And it's kind of, I think both play a role in terms of the service techs. A lot of companies do have maintenance relationships with customers, and so the service tech is the one who's going to be out there and seeing the equipment and saying, you know, this needs a lot of work. It probably is worth thinking about a replacement instead of, you know, continuing to put Band-Aids on. And so often it is the kind of the service tech who would be initiating that conversation and hopefully bringing up, you know, and by the way, if we do replace this, we can get a much more efficient option in here for you. And then the salespeople also obviously play a role. They would potentially come in at, you know, once the customer kind of agrees with the service tech that, yeah, we should think about a replacement, or if it's a referral or kind of a new customer, the sales tech or the salesperson would be leading that effort. And also in small companies, a lot of small companies out there, it's the same person really doing both of those jobs. In terms of the limitations of staffing, it was primarily on the techs, the technical people, you know, skilled people with technical HVAC skills. And as far as who would be the best person to reach out to these groups, I don't know. I guess Jake or John, do either of you have thoughts on that? I think, yeah, go ahead, Jake.
Yeah, I think we saw it was pretty clear for contractors that their distributors and manufacturers representatives were a great source of information for them for technical questions, how-to questions. So reaching out to them, to the distributors and manufacturers reps, and providing them information and training on efficient technologies and heat pumps would be a good use of resources. And on the architect and engineer side, for the plan and specify projects, reaching out directly to them, we asked them what their information sources were, and they seemed a lot more self-sufficient in terms of understanding new technologies and design capabilities there. Who in the state would reach out to the salespeople? I guess, you know, the utility program administrators, programs designed to, you know, build capabilities and knowledge in the market, would be successful at, you know, targeting those types of market actors. Anything to add there, John?
Yeah, I would also add, particularly relevant to heat pumps and RTUs, is the Minnesota Efficient Technology Accelerator that is being launched at the start of next year. So that's a Department of Commerce funded market transformation program that Center for Energy and Environment is running. And one of the primary activities within market transformation is working with those various market actors, the distributors, manufacturers, contractors. And so, we will have dedicated staff that will be doing that kind of work specifically to encourage more high efficiency and heat pump RTUs to be installed in Minnesota.
How well versed do you feel contractors are in promoting rebates for energy efficiency equipment? How much of a sales strategy is this for HVAC companies?
I can jump in on that one too. I think it varies between different companies. Some do see it as a sales strategy. They see it as kind of a way to differentiate themselves, that they will promote the rebates and really handle all the paperwork for the customer and kind of make it as smooth as possible for their customers. And they see that as a way that they can kind of set themselves apart from their competitors. And then there are others that just kind of are more, I don't know, old school or something, and they just can't be bothered really, and just want to put in the thing they've always been putting in and keep it at that. So, but I think my sense is that it's more contractors see programs as a sales tool than not.
All right. Any recommendations on how to get information out to contractors on city-sponsored initiative programs? Did you discover any Twin Cities-based HVAC newsletters or communication channels?
I don't think we saw any Twin Cities specific newsletters or channels, did we? It seemed everything was, larger regionally or nationwide in terms of contractor groups or Facebook groups, those types of things.
Yeah, I think it was, generally national. So I think it's a little bit more difficult, but doing more direct outreach to some of the bigger HVAC contractors, ultimately, although there are a lot of HVAC contractors in Minnesota, that's a relatively small group. It's kind of the 80-20 rule, that are doing a large share of the work. So having relationships with some of those bigger contractors, if you need to focus your time and efforts, could be an effective way to do that.
Yeah, and I think we've seen in other markets like Maine, Vermont, Connecticut, Oregon, leveraging trade ally networks, getting to get to know the contractors by offering training. We heard from all the contractors, they run a tight ship, they're busy, they wear a lot of hats. So through trade ally networks, you can offer marketing and training and resources and really build those relationships with contractors and provide information on more local incentive programs that they can help pitch to their customers. We've seen that, work pretty successfully in other markets.
Yeah, I would add to, it's a little bit of a tangential addition to what this question is the incentives and or technical support that utilities offer have to be worth it to HVAC contractors. So I think that as utility program implementers, we often run into issues where we have to be cost effective with our delivery of these programs and the rebates. But if we have contractors, what we've found, and I've found in my personal experience working with them, is that they are quite busy. Many of them have plenty of work to do. They're not struggling by any means, and so doing something that is potentially more time consuming and potentially more problematic, even if it's not that much different than what they normally do in terms of like baseline efficiency equipment, can be something that they just avoid unless there's big enough carrot for them. So I think that's just something to keep in mind, that just because there is an incentive doesn't mean that they're all going to jump on it. So it's trying to figure out like what is it going to take to be attractive to these contractors.
All right, we're getting questions are slowing down. So if you've been thinking about a question, please go ahead and add it to the Q&A. Could you talk a little bit about some examples of how program administrators can implement your recommendations, such as leveraging relationships between HVAC contractors and distributors and pursuing those contractor-focused market interventions? And are there any programs that you've seen that successfully implemented these strategies and can be examples to our audience?
Sure, that's a great question. I kind of touched on it a bit in the question before, but what I've seen have the most success in leveraging HVAC contractors and relationships they have is what I mentioned before, building the trade ally networks, offering marketing support, putting the list of trade allies on utility or program websites, and also offering training and resources. Contractors are, quite often small businesses and really benefit greatly from support in that marketing and training they may not have time to do. Having trade allies that connect contractors to customers are important to gain the support for those conservation programs. On the other hand, for reaching distributors who do have a great influence on the products that contractors install, midstream rebates are great for high efficiency RTUs and can be very effective. By focusing on distributors, you can kind of have a more narrow focus on a smaller set of market actors that have that broad reach with many more contractors in their own networks. We've heard, from some contractors that, they're incredibly busy, wear a lot of hats, don't have time to focus on conservation programs. So if you move those rebates upstream, distributors who may have more time or not always in the field, that burden of participation is lifted from the contractors and their customers. And we've seen these types of strategies pretty successful with Efficiency Maine, Efficiency Vermont, Energize Connecticut, and Energy Trust of Oregon.
Great. And John, you were talking just a minute ago about the upcoming market transformation program. So sounds like this will be good. Looks like that's all the questions we've got. So Mary Sue, I can turn it back over to you.
Great. Thanks, Laura, for managing the Q&A. I'm glad there was a lot of interest and a lot of questions. And thanks again to the three of you for your great presentation. If you do have follow-up questions after the webinar, please feel free to reach out to one of the team members who worked on the research or to Laura and myself. The recording of the webinar, again, I'll remind you, and the slide set will be available on the department's website in a few weeks, and the final report will be out sometime in the next couple of months. When available, you can link to either of these from the quick links on our Applied Research and Development webpage, as indicated on this slide. And the department's, that webpage has some additional resources and information related to CARD and that you might want to check out. And you can do so by going to the address at the bottom of the page. Thanks again for participating today. We appreciate your interest in CARD projects. Currently, there are no upcoming CARD webinars scheduled that I can announce, but if you want to keep abreast of upcoming CARD webinars as they are scheduled and other news related to the Conservation Improvement Program, sign up for SIP updates through our email list. You can do this at the link on this slide. In the meantime, contact me directly if you have questions or suggestions for the CARD program or for CARD webinars. Final reminder, there will be a short evaluation that launches after this webinar. Please take a few minutes to fill out the questions and let us know how we did today. Thanks again and have a great afternoon.